What's going on, guys? Felwitzer here, bringing you another Destiny 2 video. Today's video is going to be on the Ignition Hunter build using Calibans Hand. This build revolves around making the biggest ignitions humanly possible, lighting the whole world on fire and blowing past everything that gets in your way. We can make ignitions using our exotic of choice, the Conditional Finality, or with our incandescent primary weapon, as well as, of course, with the knife itself, thanks to the benefit of Calibans Hand. This means our ad clear is fantastic, and that means we can also utilize the healing grenade in order to give us some really good sustain that we can chain in this build. And this of course leaves our heavy slot open for doing the max damage to whatever it is that we're doing, whether that be in raids, nightfalls, or even just the seasonal activity. Without further ado, let's break down the build, starting with the subclass. We're obviously going to be using Gunslinger here, and we're going to be taking advantage of Blade Barrage to have an extra source of big damage on demand. Next up, we're going to be using Gambler's Dodge. This dodge is going to allow us to refresh our proximity knife if we miss a target. And that, of course, leads into our melee, the Proximity Explosive Knife. Now, with Caliban's Hand equipped, whenever we get a kill with this knife, it'll cause an instant ignition, which will blow up the entire surrounding area, which is going to be fantastic for this build. Our grenade of choice is going to be the Healing Grenade. Again, this is going to be our main source of sustain in the build, and we'll be able to prolong the restoration effects thanks to one of our fragments. For the aspects, we're going to be using Knock 'em Down to increase the damage of our Blade Barrage, and we're also going to be using it to get our knives refreshed whenever we get a kill with them. And then for our other aspect of choice, we're going to be using On Your Mark to increase the reload speed and handling of our weapons, and also give us 3 fragment slots. And moving on to the fragments, we're going to be using Ember of Eruption. This is going to expand the radius of our ignitions, meaning that we're going to be able to kill even more things when we make things explode, which is fantastic. We're going to be using Ember of Torches, so that way whenever we do throw that knife, we get the Radiant buff. That's going to be a 25% damage buff for all our weapons for the duration. And since we're going to be throwing our knives a lot, this buff will be up 100% of the time. And to keep in line with that, we're going to be using Ember of Solace. This is going to extend the duration of both our restoration from our healing grenade as well as our radiant on our melee, and combining that with Ember of Empyrean, which will allow us to refresh the duration of both radiant and restoration whenever we get a kill with a solar weapon. For our last fragment, we're going to be using Ember of Ashes, so our incandescent energy weapon is going to deal more scorch damage and allow for more burning and ignitions. Onto the stat priority for the build, what you're going to want to focus on is 100 resilience, just to give you the 30% DR, and then moving on from resilience, you're going to want 70s in intellect, recovery, and mobility, or as close as you can, as we're going to be using font mods to get them all the way to 100. Starting with the mods on our helmet, we're going to be using 1 copy of Solar Siphon, 1 copy of Heavy Ammo Finder, and 1 copy of Font of Wisdom. The Solar Siphon will allow us to generate orbs on double kills with our solar weapons. The Heavy Ammo Finder will keep our heavy ammo topped off nicely throughout our engagements. And the Font of Wisdom is going to give us even more intellect, so that way we can fuel our blade barrages and get them up even more often. Our exotic for the build is, of course, Caliban's Hand. This makes our proximity throwing knives scorch targets on hit and cause ignitions on kills. This is some of the best AoE in the game. It is extremely satisfying to watch the fireworks go off whenever you get one of these throwing knife kills. And what you're going to want to do, especially in the higher level content where enemy health is high enough they can survive one throwing knife, is you're going to want to weaken them up just enough and then finish them with that throwing knife to cause that giant ignition that will wipe the rest of the room for you. Calibans also has a secondary benefit that if you throw the knife and miss, it sticks into the ground, and while it is stuck there just waiting to go off, it will increase your melee temporarily, so that way your next knife will come back a little bit quicker. On the gloves, you want to run 1 copy of Solar Loader, 1 copy of Impact Induction, and 1 copy of Heavy Handed. The Solar Loader is obviously going to benefit our solar weapons by making them reload quicker. The 1 copy of Impact Induction is going to allow us to get grenade energy whenever we get a melee kill, which is going to be very often with this build. And then the 1 copy of Heavy Handed is going to allow us to generate orbs with our melee kills, which is just going to allow us to generate even more orbs for ourselves and our teammates. For the chest piece, as always, customize your resists accordingly to what you need for a certain encounter. I tend to lean towards 1 solar resist, 1 void resist, and 1 concussive dampener as my standard, but change those around frequently if the encounter demands it. For our leg armor, we're going to be going with 1 copy of Recuperation, 1 copy of Solar Surge, and 1 copy of Font of Agility. Now, our 1 copy of Recuperation just means that whenever we pick up an orb, we'll be able to get a small heal out of it, giving us more sustain. The 1 copy of Solar Surge will buff all our weapons with that flat 10% damage. We can keep this up pretty much 100% of the time. And then finishing it off with that Font of Agility, that's going to give us an extra 30 mobility, which will get us closer to 100 mobility, so that way we can roll more often And remember, our Gambler's Dodge is our primary method of restoring our knife if we should miss and mess up our combo. This gives us a second chance to start the combo out fresh again if we miss and get more knives thrown for more ignitions. Finally, on our cloak, we're going to be rocking 1 copy of Time Dilation, 1 copy of Font of Restoration, and 1 copy of Bomber. The Time Dilation is going to extend the duration of our Surge and 3 font mods, which is going to be great. The Font of Restoration will give us our 30 extra recovery, getting us closer to that 100. And then the 1 copy of Bomber just means that whenever we perform our Gambler's Dodge, we get a little bit of grenade energy back each and every time, which is going to be good to get the healing grenades back for even more sustain. For our weapons, starting with the kinetic slot, we're generally going to want to be using Conditional Finality. This is, of course, the Root of Nightmares exotic. The second shot, causing an instant ignition if most of the pellets hit, fits right in with our build, and with Ember of Eruption, the ignition that it causes is going to be even bigger and hit harder. However, if we need something else in the kinetic slot, we have other good exotic options. You have Izanagi for good burst damage combos, you have Witherhoard for AoE, and you even have Arbalest for more anti-champion utility. Conditional Finality, of course, has Unstoppable built in, essentially thanks to its freeze and then ignitions. But if you need anti-barrier, for example, Arbalest is going to be a fantastic choice for perhaps Nightfall settings where that's going to be a lot more prevalent and you're going to need the range. For the energy slot, this is where your primary is going to go. You're going to want to be using an incandescent weapon, preferably one with enhanced incandescent that is craftable. This season, for our anti-champion utility, we have Unstoppable Hand Cannon, Overload Scout, and Anti-Barrier Auto Rifle. So having the Zahuli's Bane from King's Fall with enhanced incandescent and explosive payload is a great start. This gives us some extra unstoppable coverage. I actually think this is one of the most underrated weapons in the game right now. It's really good for this build, but just in general as a solar weapon, it is fantastic. Moving on to the Amit. This auto rifle is something that I was sleeping on a little bit, and I'm actually leveling it right now. Definitely a really solid solar weapon, and probably the best solar auto rifle right now for PvE. And then rounding it out with the Trusty from DSC. This thing also can run enhanced incandescent, and it is just a really good scout rifle in general. It performs incredibly well at range, as you would expect, and is definitely the premier ranged option if you need a ranged primary. For the heavy weapons, we have a lot of good solar options, starting with the Apex Predator from Last Wish. This is by far the best raid DPS rocket that is solar, so it fits right into the build. But if you need a more Nightfall or Lost Sector specific rocket, where you just want that initial rocket to hit as hard as possible, then we have the Time Lost Hezin's Vengeance with Vorpal and Overflow. This means whenever you pick up a green or purple brick, it's going to just auto-load for you. And then, of course, the Vorpal is just going to give you that flat extra 10% damage to the champions and the bosses that you're shooting at, which is just going to be good for conserving ammo so you don't need to fire the second rocket just to take down a champion. Next on to the linears, of course we have Cataclysmic, the best linear in the game right now, for any bosses that require precision damage specifically. It can be a very useful tool for that, or for just long range encounters where you can't guarantee rocket hits from cross map. Onto the machine gun, we have the Fixed Odds from the Duality Dungeon. This is a craftable machine gun with enhanced incandescent, so it fits in with our build fantastically, causing great solar explosions and is fantastic for mowing down all kinds of adds. And then rounding out our heavy weapons, we have the Caretaker Sword from Season 20, craftable again with incandescent. So if you need a close range alternative to slay out and cause massive amounts of scorch, this sword is going to be a great option for you. And with that all out of the way, let's talk about how the build plays a little bit. You want to be primarily relying on your knife to get your kills. This is going to give you Radiant and then allow your weapons to hit that much harder. And then once the enemies are kind of thinned out by the initial ignitions of your proximity knife, you can clean up with your primary weapon, which is then just going to spread incandescent scorches around, killing anything that's left. You're going to burn it all to the ground, and it is absolutely fantastic. You're going to be using Conditional Finality on any of the major targets that get in your way, blowing them completely out of the way. With those freezes followed by ignitions, you're going to be able to clear massive waves of adds with zero problems whatsoever. Again, if you miss a throwing knife by chance, you can roll to reset the cooldown and get another chance at it. What you want to do is, again, prioritize weakening tougher enemies and then throwing the knife at them for the finishing blow, so that way you can trigger that ignition, get the explosion off, and watch as everything blows up. And then, of course, whenever a boss shows up, you bust out your heavy weapon of choice, whatever you've chosen for that situation, and you just melt it to the ground. And of course, for even more burst, we also have Blade Barrage, which is one of the highest burst damage supers in the game. And for whenever we get low, we can toss a healing grenade at our feet to top ourselves back off, give us a restoration buff, and then we can extend that out by getting kills with our solar abilities and solar weapons, along with our radiant buff that we can apply to not only ourselves but our teammates. This is a really good build for ad clear, and it's also still a good option for DPS with just a few weapon adjustments. I think this one is an incredibly satisfying build to play and get right, and definitely worth your time to go get all the pieces and give it a shot. And that's going to be about it for my Ignition Hunter build. I hope you guys liked it. Leave me some comments down below if you have any suggestions for the build. And with that, this is Felwinter signing out, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.